What if everything you believed about getting old was wrong? Mildred sat at her kitchen table, the soft hum of the refrigerator and the faint ticking of the wall clock filling the silence around her. The morning sun filtered weakly through the lace curtains, casting gentle shadows on the yellowed wallpaper that had seen better days. In her hands, she held a photograph, her younger self, vibrant and full of life, standing on a beach with windblown hair and a radiant smile that seemed almost foreign now. She studied the image, wondering when the years had slipped past so quietly, like sand through her fingers, leaving behind only a shadow of the woman she used to be. The aches in her joints, the thinning hair, the loneliness that wrapped around her heart like a cold blanket, all these whispered the same story. She was fading, becoming invisible, no longer part of a world that seemed to move faster than she could follow. The radio played softly in the background, a news segment catching her attention. Elon Musk just did what no billionaire has ever dared to do, the announcer said with unmistakable awe. His latest project defies conventional wisdom about age and ability. Musk is launching a new initiative to harness the wisdom of elders for groundbreaking innovation, proving that creativity doesn't have an expiration date. Mildred's eyes widened. Elon Musk, the brilliant disruptor, the man known for sending rockets into space and dreaming of colonizing Mars, was now speaking to people like her, the overlooked, the too old. She leaned in closer, the story capturing her imagination in a way nothing had in years. The clip showed Musk speaking at a conference, his voice steady, passionate. When something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor. That phrase settled deep in Mildred's chest, stirring something she hadn't felt in a long time. A flicker of hope, a whisper that maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late. The kitchen felt smaller suddenly, the weight of years pressing down but also the possibility of change pulling at her. What if she could rewrite her story? What if age wasn't a cage but a key? Her mind raced with questions that felt both terrifying and exhilarating. Outside, the neighborhood stirred to life, mailboxes clattered, distant laughter from children playing, the steady rhythm of a world that didn't wait for anyone. But here, in this quiet kitchen, Mildred made a decision, small but monumental, to listen to the spark Elon had lit. To dare to hope again. She reached for her phone, hesitating, then typed quickly into the search bar, "How to start a blog after 60." The cursor blinked patiently as if waiting for her to begin a new chapter. And as she did, she whispered to herself, "Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning." What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? This was her moment, the moment it all changed. Mildred and Whitaker had once been a name spoken often, if only in the tight circles of Pine Hollow Elementary School and the community potlucks held in the rust-colored church basement on Maple Street. Back then, she was Mrs. Whitaker, fifth-grade teacher, the kind who made her students believe in magic through books, who wore brooches shaped like sunflowers and owls and whose laugh could echo down a hallway like a song. That woman was still somewhere inside her, she supposed, but decades had a way of dimming even the brightest of lights. She had retired early, too early, if she were honest, after the unexpected loss of her husband, Tom. Cancer. Quick, brutal, and terribly silent. He had been her high school sweetheart, the boy who brought her lemonade at the local fair and danced with her under the gym lights when she wore that pale blue dress with daisies stitched around the hem. They built a modest life together. No luxury, but always laughter, always music in the background and crossword puzzles shared on Sunday mornings. They never had the money to travel, not really, but they had dreams. After retirement, they were supposed to buy a small camper and see the country, Utah's red rocks, the coasts of Maine, the deserts of Arizona. Tom died 2 months before they could even make the down payment on the camper. That was over a decade ago now, though some mornings it still felt like yesterday. After Tom passed, Mildred withdrew slowly, not all at once. First, she stopped going to the community book club. Then the potlucks. Then church. She still grocery shopped and waved to neighbors, but it was the kind of wave that asked not to be spoken to. Time passed in predictable cycles, groceries on Monday, laundry on Thursday, evening TV shows on a strict schedule, doctor appointments penciled in months ahead. And in the quiet that filled her small, neatly kept house, there was one growing ache that no medication touched, the silence between her and her daughter, Marianne. Their falling out had not been volcanic. No shouting match, no dramatic slamming of doors. It had been more like a slow freezing over, the kind that starts with frost and ends with ice so thick you forget what warmth ever felt like. Marianne had chosen a path Mildred didn't understand: corporate life in New York, cold emails instead of Sunday visits, her voice sharp, always rushed. The last time they'd spoken on the phone, nearly 3 years ago, Marianne had said something about Mildred needing to move into assisted living before there's a problem. That sentence, so clinical and distant, had lodged in Mildred's chest like a splinter. She hadn't replied, hadn't known how. The silence had only widened since. Now, at 68, Mildred's world had shrunk to the edges of her property line and the reach of her aging hands. She still kept her books neatly stacked, still watered the houseplants Tom used to talk to like they were children, and still cleaned the house every Saturday with ritualistic precision. But there were days, too many of them, when she felt as though the world had moved on and forgotten to take her with it. There were regrets, too many to count. She wished she'd said yes more often, danced in the kitchen instead of worrying about cleaning it, taken pictures of the ordinary days, and dared to dream without checking the budget first. The one regret that lived the loudest was never seeing the places she used to write about in her travel journal, a leather-bound book she had bought at a bookstore in 1982, pages still uncreased and mostly empty, tucked away in the bottom drawer of her nightstand like a secret love letter to herself. On slow evenings, she would sometimes pull it out, tracing the faded ink of cities she wanted to see: Sedona, Savannah, Yosemite, Montreal. She had once planned a detailed itinerary to Yellowstone, complete with motel stops and gas station snacks. But plans are fragile things, and life had a habit of knocking them over with a single gust. She had once believed, deeply, that dreams had a deadline. That if you didn't do something by 40, or 50, or maybe 60 at the latest, it was gone forever, like milk left out too long, like summer after the first frost. So she tucked the book away again and again, whispering, maybe someday, until someday turned into almost never. It was this version of Mildred, the one dusting old shelves, heating up single-serve meals, and listening to classical music because silence was too loud, who had heard Elon Musk's voice on the radio that morning. A voice she had never paid much attention to before. He wasn't the type of man she thought had anything to say to someone like her. Rockets? Mars? Electric cars? It all felt like noise from a younger, shinier world. But there was something in the way he spoke, something in his defiance of what can't and shouldn't look like, that stirred her in a way nothing else had. When he said, when something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor, she felt like he was talking directly to the part of her that had been buried for years. The part that still had a pulse. That evening, after putting away the dinner dishes and checking the locks as she always did, she wandered into the guest bedroom, once Marianne's room, now mostly filled with boxes and the dusty treadmill Tom had bought during a health kick. She opened the nightstand drawer and took out the travel journal. The leather had grown stiff with age, but the brass button still opened with a satisfying pop. She sat on the edge of the bed, knees aching slightly as they always did after too many steps, and flipped through the pages. There it was, the dream. Not loud or glamorous, but hers. The handwriting wobbled in places, a few coffee stains smudged the ink, but the words were still there. She turned to a blank page. For a long time, she stared at it, pen in hand, unsure of what to say after so many years of saying nothing. Finally, slowly, she wrote, August 7th. I heard something today that made me feel alive again. It was just a voice on the radio, but it said the words I think I've been needing for years. Maybe it's not too late. Maybe I'm not finished yet. She didn't write more than that. She closed the book gently, stood up, and placed it not back in the drawer, but on her bedside table, as if to remind herself it still mattered. That night, for the first time in years, she dreamed. Not of the past, not of Tom or the school or the what-ifs, but of deserts and oceans and winding roads and the feeling of wind in her hair. It wasn't much. But it was something. And something, she realized, was a very good place to start. The morning after she wrote in her journal, Mildred woke before the alarm. There was no reason to set one anymore, but old habits, like age, clung tightly. The sun was still pushing through the gray as she moved through the motions: boil the water, steep the tea, toast the bread, but something felt different. Not brighter, exactly. But stirred. Like the air before a storm, when everything feels electric. She sat with her tea in the living room, her old slippers scuffing against the hardwood floor, the remote resting in her hand without interest. The television stayed off. Instead, her eyes drifted to the hallway where, hung just above the thermostat, was a framed drawing from a former student, a space shuttle with stars all around it and the words, "Mrs. Whittaker is the best," scrawled in wobbly marker ink. She remembered that boy. Jeremy. He used to say he wanted to be an astronaut. She'd told him to write to NASA, and he had. He even brought her the response letter. They wrote back, he'd said, eyes wide, and they told me to keep dreaming. But somewhere along the way, dreams became impractical. And eventually, silly. She hadn't thought about Jeremy in years, but suddenly the memory tugged at her like a thread loosening an old sweater. What had happened to her own dreams? Where had they gone? She opened her phone, slowly, the way she always did, squinting slightly at the bright screen and tapping the magnifier icon. She typed Elon Musk speech on aging and pressed play on the first video that appeared. It wasn't long, maybe 5 minutes. Musk stood on a plain stage with a dark backdrop, no slides or theatrics. Just him, speaking in that flat, deliberate voice. The greatest mistake we make, he said, is assuming people lose value with age. But what if the reverse is true? What if age is the asset? Wisdom compounded. Patterns noticed. Lessons paid for in full. Mildred stared at the screen. She had always thought her life had been slowly reducing in value since her last day in the classroom. But what if she had been wrong? What if she wasn't decaying but accruing? Still, the voice of doubt showed up like it always did. It always wore the face of someone else, sometimes her late mother, sometimes a nurse, sometimes Marianne. Today, it sounded like Dr. Patel, her general practitioner, who had told her just last fall, "You need to be more cautious. People your age shouldn't push themselves. People your age." That phrase, while technically accurate, always landed like a slap. What people? What age? When did curiosity expire? Why was the world so eager to seat older people in the back rows, out of the way, while the loud ones filled the front? And yet, she had accepted it. For years, she had quietly agreed. Not out loud, never directly, but through inaction. Through silence. Through always putting the travel journal back in the drawer. She set the phone down and leaned back in the chair, hearing the creak of the old cushion under her. She didn't like the war going on in her head, hope on one side, fear on the other. She wanted to believe in the words Musk had said, but another voice whispered, "Don't be ridiculous. You're not Elon Musk. You're an old woman in a small town who hasn't done anything bold since 1994 when you cut your own bangs." She chuckled dryly at that thought. But the moment passed, and she sat with the discomfort of it. That deep, gnawing question, is it too late? And its cruel cousin, what's the point? Around midday, the phone rang, jolting her out of her spiral. Caller ID, Marianne. Her heart stuttered. She stared at the screen as it rang, her breath tight in her chest. They hadn't spoken in years. Not truly. Her daughter had called after a minor surgery last spring, but it had been more of a wellness check than a conversation. And now, here it was. The phone buzzed a final time, then fell silent. Missed call. Mildred sat still for a long time, thumb hovering above the redial button. But she didn't press it. She couldn't. Not yet. Later that afternoon, she took a walk through her backyard garden, the one Tom had started with her in the 80s. Overgrown now, patches of weeds scattered between the perennials, the path half buried in leaves and broken twigs. She knelt, knees popping with age, and began to clear a small patch near the roses. Her hands moved slowly, methodically, as the sun warmed her shoulders and birds chirped overhead. Gardening had always calmed her. It gave chaos an order. Pull what doesn't belong. Nurture what does. She whispered aloud, "What's the point?" and answered herself in the rhythm of her work. Maybe the point isn't big. Maybe it's not saving the world. Maybe it's just choosing to act instead of fade. That night, over a simple dinner of soup and crackers, she opened her laptop. It had been a gift from the school district when she retired. She hadn't used it much since then. With a few hesitant clicks, she opened a browser and typed, "How to start a blog." A tutorial popped up, cheerful and full of jargon she didn't entirely understand. Still, she followed it slowly, writing down steps on a yellow notepad. Her handwriting was shaky but legible. Step 1, choose a name. That stopped her. What would she call it? She thought about that dusty travel journal, the dreams never chased, the words never said. She smiled, just a little, and typed, "Still dreaming." It wasn't flashy, but it was true. She filled in the basic information, hit create, and blinked as a bare-bones blog appeared. A blank canvas. A space for her voice. For someone who had spent the last 10 years barely speaking beyond grocery store greetings, it felt enormous. She clicked New Post. The cursor blinked at her again, as it had done on her phone the day before. She took a breath, then wrote, "My name is Mildred. I am 68 years old. I used to be a teacher. I used to believe that dreaming was for the young. But today, something changed. I heard a voice that said my age was not a limitation but an asset. And I realized, I've been quiet for too long. So this is me, beginning again." She hovered her finger over the Publish button. Her hand trembled. And then she clicked. The screen refreshed. The post was live. No fanfare. No applause. But something in her chest expanded, like lungs breathing fully after years of shallow inhales. It wasn't a revolution. It wasn't a viral moment. But it was a beginning. And sometimes, a beginning is more than enough. The next morning, Mildred awoke with a strange weightless feeling, as if her body had forgotten for a moment that it was supposed to ache. The sun pushed through the curtains again, softer this time, and for the first time in years she didn't immediately reach for her robe or slippers. Instead, she lay there in her bed, staring at the ceiling, the faint smell of lavender from her pillowcase reminding her of spring. The blog post. It had been a single moment, a small click, but it echoed in her chest like a bell that refused to stop ringing. She got up and walked straight to the laptop. The screen flickered to life with its usual slowness, like an old friend reluctant to rise from a nap. She opened the browser and typed in the blog's address. Still dreaming. There it was. Her words. Right where she left them. But now, there was something new, one comment. Her heart skipped. She clicked it. I'm 72 and I thought I was alone in feeling this way. Thank you for reminding me I'm not. Please keep writing. That was it. No name. No picture. Just a spark across the vast darkness of the internet, a match struck in a tunnel. It made her chest tighten. She wasn't alone. Someone else out there, another person who had probably also been forgotten by the machinery of the modern world, had read her words and seen themselves. She sat back in the chair, eyes wide, a new sense of responsibility creeping in. It wasn't just for her now. She had cracked a door open, and someone else had stepped through. The kettle whistled in the kitchen. As she made her tea, she thought about that comment. About the thousands of people her age who might also be waking up to grey walls and quiet houses, waiting for something, anything, to feel real again. She wondered how many had a dream stashed in a drawer like her journal. She wondered how many would chase it if they only saw one other person do it first. That thought stayed with her through breakfast. Through her usual crossword puzzle. Through lunch. That evening, she sat down to write again. She wasn't sure what to say, but the words came anyway, like water finding its own path downhill. Today, someone read my story and told me they felt seen. I didn't think that would matter so much. But it does. I've lived most of my life quietly. I thought it was modesty. But now I think it was fear. I don't want to live in fear anymore. I'm going to do something I've talked about for over 30 years. I'm going to start traveling. Maybe not around the world. Maybe not even out of state. But I'm going to leave this house and see something new. And I'm going to write about it. Because maybe that's what dreams are, things we do out loud, even when nobody else thinks they matter. She hit publish again. And this time, it felt easier. The blog quickly became part of. It was the sound of a notification that startled her the next morning, a soft ping from the old laptop that hadn't made a sound in years. Mildred had left it open on the dining table overnight, unsure if anything would happen after posting her blog entry. She figured it would vanish into the void, like a message in a bottle dropped into an ocean she no longer understood. But there it was, one comment. From someone named Linda from Ohio. The message was short. Mildred, I'm 72 and I thought I was the only one who felt this way. Thank you for writing. I'll be reading. That was it. A few words from a stranger. But it felt like someone had lit a match in the dark. Mildred stared at the screen, stunned by how much those words meant. She read them again. Then again. The loneliness that had wrapped around her like an old shawl suddenly didn't feel so tight. Maybe she wasn't invisible. Maybe she had never been, only quiet. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard. She didn't know what she was doing, not really, but she replied, "Thank you, Linda. You're not alone. Neither am I." The words looked small on the screen, but she felt them like a heartbeat. Something inside her had shifted. And it didn't stop there. Over the next few days, she received a handful of other comments. Not many, but each one arrived like a letter from an old friend. A man from Kansas said he'd been afraid to write music again after retiring from his band in the 1980s. A woman from Vermont shared that she'd recently bought watercolor paints after 30 years. People were hungry for purpose. For connection. For permission. And somehow, through a blog started in a quiet kitchen by a woman no one had heard of, they were finding it. But even as Mildred's confidence flickered to life, the old doubts lingered. She hadn't told anyone about the blog. Not her neighbors. Not the women from church, though she hadn't been to a service in months. Certainly not her daughter. Part of her feared the reaction. "That's cute, Mom," Marianne might say. Or worse, "You need to be careful. You're not young anymore." That phrase echoed constantly in her mind, as though it had been stitched into her thoughts, "You're not young anymore." But what if youth wasn't the point? What if strength came not from age, but from the refusal to go quietly? Elon Musk hadn't spoken directly to people like her, she knew that. But when he stood up on a stage and said that age was an asset, he gave her something that doctors, news anchors, and even well-meaning friends never had. Permission to keep moving forward. That was the real catalyst. Not him as a person, but the courage in the idea that limitations are often lies we've agreed to live with. That night, she stood in her garage, holding a dust-covered box labeled, Mildred's Projects. She hadn't opened it since Tom passed. Inside were scraps of old writing, a small wood carving set, some paints she had bought on sale years ago. But buried beneath it all was the real treasure, a small handheld camcorder, the kind they used to use on family road trips. She held it in both hands, wiped the lens gently with the hem of her shirt, and felt the weight of it. She used to have ideas, plans to record small educational videos after retiring, maybe even teach history lessons online. She'd never followed through. Too self-conscious. Too tired. Too afraid she'd look foolish. But now, with this spark pushing at her ribs, she wondered, what if I tried? The next morning, she did something no one in her family would have expected. She cleared the cluttered dining table, propped the camcorder on a stack of cookbooks, and pressed record. Her voice shook at first. She felt silly, speaking to an empty room. But she began anyway. Hi. I'm Mildred. I was a teacher for 38 years, and I've lived a quiet life since then. But I'm here now, because I believe it's not too late to share what I've learned. And maybe, just maybe, we can walk this path together. She paused, searching for what to say next, and then added, I heard someone say that age is an asset. I didn't believe it at first. But I think I'm starting to. She stopped recording and watched it back. It wasn't polished. The lighting was too warm, the camera slightly tilted. But she looked alive. There was a sparkle in her eyes she hadn't seen in the mirror for years. She uploaded it to the blog with trembling hands, labeling it simply, Video Number 1, Starting Over. She didn't tell anyone. She didn't need to. By the end of the day, there were 2 comments. By the next morning, there were 9. People were responding. Not to her perfection, but to her truth. That afternoon, she took her first walk around the block in months. Not just to get the mail, not to run errands. Just a walk. The air was warm and smelled like fresh-cut grass. Her knees ached, but she kept going. Past the neighbors she hadn't spoken to in years. Past the bench where she and Tom used to sit with ice cream cones. Past the school she used to teach in. She stopped outside the chain-link fence and watched children running across the blacktop. For a moment, time folded. She could hear the echoes of her own voice calling out spelling words, the crinkle of brown paper lunch bags, the excited buzz of kids lining up for recess. She closed her eyes and breathed it in. This was the world she believed had left her behind. But maybe it hadn't. Maybe she had just stepped off the path, too unsure to return. She stood there until the bell rang and the children disappeared back inside, then turned around and walked home, slower this time, but steady. Back inside, she added a second post to the blog. Today, I walked to the school. It's the first time I've been that far in years. My knees protested the whole way, but my heart was loud enough to drown them out. If you're reading this and you've been waiting for a sign, this is it. We can begin again. Even if we have to start small. Especially if we do. That night, she dreamt again, not of regrets this time, but of movement. She dreamed of walking down unfamiliar streets, of boarding trains with strangers who became friends, of standing in front of a small crowd and sharing stories into a microphone that didn't tremble in her hands. In the morning, when she checked her inbox, there was an email with the subject line, "You're inspiring us." It was from a woman named Jeanette in Oregon who had shown Mildred's video to her local community center group. "We meet once a week," the email read, "to talk about what's next in life. Most of us thought our next was over. But your voice gave us a new kind of hope. Please keep going." Mildred sat with that email for a long time, her hand over her chest, tears slipping down the side of her face. Not sad tears. Not this time. This was something else, something close to being found after years of being lost in plain sight. And in that quiet kitchen, the same one that had once felt like a cage, she whispered out loud, "I'm not finished." 3 weeks after posting her first blog entry, Mildred Whittaker found herself staring at a blinking cursor once again, only this time it wasn't met with fear, it was met with something fiercer. Intent. Her blog, Still Dreaming, had grown far beyond what she expected. Dozens of comments had become hundreds. Her videos, simple, unedited clips of her sharing stories about life, history, aging, regrets, small daily victories, were now being shared in Facebook groups she didn't even know existed. Retirement forums, widow support pages, even one called Late Bloomers Over 60. Each day, someone new sent a message saying, "I thought I was the only one." And still, she hadn't told Marianne. That wound still lived in a quiet, untended place. But Mildred was starting to understand that healing wasn't always loud. Sometimes, it began in whispers. One evening, just before sunset, she sat outside with a cup of chamomile tea and scrolled through her inbox. A name jumped out, morningviewmedia@gmail.com. The message was short and professional. They were a digital storytelling company, the kind that produced documentary-style segments on remarkable people doing remarkable things. A junior producer had come across Mildred's blog and videos through a relative in Michigan, and now they wanted to feature her in a short online segment about reinvention after 65. She read the message twice, unsure if it was real. She almost deleted it, convinced it had to be spam. But she didn't. She read it again. Then again. And something in her chest stirred, not panic, not fear, but disbelief laced with possibility. She replied that evening, unsure of her own boldness, "Yes. I'd be willing to speak with you." The next afternoon, she found herself staring into the screen of her laptop, face framed awkwardly, unsure if the light was too harsh or if she looked too old or too plain. But the producer, a warm woman named Natalie, probably in her 30s, had a kind voice and asked thoughtful questions. "Why now?" she asked gently. "What changed?" Mildred thought about that. About the long silence she'd lived inside. About the loneliness that had settled in like dust. About Tom's empty chair, the untouched travel journal, the estranged relationship with her daughter, and then about a single sentence spoken by a billionaire on a stage thousands of miles away. "I think," Mildred said slowly, "I got tired of agreeing with the idea that I was done. I heard Elon Musk say age is an asset, and I realized I had been letting myself expire in slow motion. And I don't want to expire. I want to explore." Natalie smiled. "That's beautiful," she said. The segment aired 5 days later on a small but growing YouTube channel called Life Beyond Limits. It was only 8 minutes long. They included clips from her blog, excerpts from her journal entries, photos from her teaching days, and a few shots of her walking through her garden and talking into the camera with the soft, wise rhythm of someone who had lived a full life and still had more to say. The video's title was simple, "Still Dreaming at 68, Mildred's New Chapter." She thought maybe a few hundred people would watch. Maybe 1,000. She didn't expect it to pass 100,000 views in 2 days. The comments poured in. People calling her brave. Calling her wise. Calling her the grandmother we all wish we had. Some called her the Elon Musk of late bloomers. That one made her laugh so hard she nearly spilled her tea. But it wasn't just strangers who saw it. On the third day, as she sat sorting mail by the front door, her phone rang. It was Marianne. She didn't hesitate this time. She answered. "Hi," she said, her voice soft but steady. "Hi, Mom." Marianne's voice was calm but unsure, like someone testing uncertain ground. "I saw the video," she said. Silence hung between them, then Marianne added, "I didn't know you were doing all this." Mildred took a breath. "Neither did I," she said. "But I guess I started to believe I still had something to give." Another pause. Then, quietly, Marianne said, "You do." "I'm sorry I haven't been around. I guess I thought you were okay, or that you wanted space. And I didn't know how to fix everything." "Neither did I," Mildred replied. "But we don't have to fix everything today. "I'd like to visit," Marianne said. "Maybe soon." "I'd like that," Mildred whispered. When the call ended, she sat in silence, tears on her cheeks. It wasn't closure, but it was a crack in the wall. Enough light to start growing something new. A week later, the Today Show called. They'd seen the online video and wanted to do a short segment. "We're calling it, the Reinvention Hour," the producer said. "You'd be our opening story." Mildred almost declined. It felt too big, too loud, too far from the quiet life she had grown used to. But something stopped her. Maybe it was the part of her that had once stood in front of fifth graders with chalk on her hands and fire in her heart. Maybe it was the woman who had written city names in a travel journal and buried it in a drawer. Or maybe it was Elon Musk's voice echoing in her head, "When something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor." So she said yes. She was flown to New York City, the first time she'd been on a plane in over 20 years. A production assistant met her at the airport with a handwritten sign that said, Mildred W. They drove past bridges and buildings that felt like postcards until she reached the hotel, where her room overlooked the city skyline. That night, she sat by the window, the lights of Manhattan blinking like stars, and she wrote in her journal, "I thought I was done. But I was just waiting for permission to begin again." The next morning, she stepped onto the set with a microphone clipped to her blouse and lights shining in her eyes. The hosts greeted her warmly. She wasn't nervous, not really. She was present. Fully awake in a life she had almost abandoned. They asked her about aging, about regret, about reinvention. She told the truth. "We are not done," she said, looking into the camera. "We're just paused. But the play button is still there. You just have to press it." The segment aired to millions. Her blog exploded. She received invitations to speak at local events, senior centers, women's clubs, even universities. Her world, once the size of her living room, was expanding by the day. But the moment that broke her wide open came quietly. In her inbox, buried between newsletters and blog comments, was a message from Jeremy, the student who once dreamed of being an astronaut. "Mrs. Whitaker," it began, "I saw your video. You probably don't remember me, but you once told me to write to NASA. I did. And I never stopped dreaming. I'm not an astronaut, but I work at SpaceX now. Every day, I try to build the future. And I just wanted to say thank you. You saw me before I saw myself." Mildred covered her mouth with both hands, the tears coming before she could stop them. SpaceX. Elon Musk. Jeremy. The little boy who drew her space shuttles had grown into a man helping launch them. She looked up from the screen and whispered, "You saw me too, Elon. Even if you didn't mean to." That night, as she sat outside beneath a blanket of stars, she felt something shift permanently. Not just in her. In the world. In the belief that purpose had an expiration date. She was proof that it didn't. She was a woman reborn, not as someone new, but as someone rediscovered. The breaking point had come. And it hadn't shattered her. It had opened her wide. The house didn't feel quite as quiet anymore. Not because it had gotten louder in the literal sense, but because something fundamental had changed inside it, and inside her. Every corner that once echoed with a silence shaped by regret now seemed to hold a spark of energy, like it was waiting for something. Waiting for her. Mildred found herself moving with a kind of rhythm she hadn't known in decades. Morning started with her writing, just a few hundred words, sometimes a full post, sometimes a memory she thought she'd forgotten until the pen brought it back to life. She had returned to using the travel journal, the one that had sat untouched for so long. It was no longer a book of places she would never go. It had become something else, her map. A place to gather thoughts, plans, fragments of dreams she was still brave enough to claim. She'd titled a new section, Next Stops, and began filling it with small, meaningful goals, visit Jeremy at SpaceX, take a solo train ride along the coast, teach one workshop at the library, reconcile with Marianne. That last one was written in careful, trembling script. It was the hardest, the most fragile. But it stayed there, underlined twice. Because something in her heart refused to let it go. The momentum built faster than she expected. After the Today Show aired, her online presence grew from a warm little community to a full-blown movement. The blog passed 500,000 views. The YouTube channel she never meant to have passed 100,000 subscribers. People began referring to her as the face of the late-life renaissance. Articles were written. Invitations came in, some she accepted, many she didn't. She wasn't interested in fame. She was interested in meaning. But one email stopped her in her tracks. It came from the Elon Musk Foundation. At first she thought it was a prank. The subject line was simple: your voice matters more than you know. The email came from a woman named Tara who identified herself as part of Elon's team, specifically on initiatives focused on education and aging. She'd seen the Still Dreaming video through a share from one of Elon's engineers, Jeremy. The email was full of admiration, but it ended with a bold, unexpected invitation: Mr. Musk was deeply moved by your story. He would like to invite you to speak at the next Future Frontiers Summit in Austin. It would be a brief address, 10 minutes, but we believe your perspective represents exactly the kind of thinking this event is built for. No pressure. But we hope you'll consider it. Mildred stared at the screen for nearly an hour. Her hands hovered, left, right, trembling, her thoughts running in circles. Elon Musk. Not just a name on a screen. Not just a quote that lit a fire. A real man. A real invitation. Part of her wanted to say no. Too big. Too late. Too far from who she used to be. But then she looked up at the mirror. Not the bathroom one that made her cringe. The hallway mirror, the one with the old wood frame Tom had made her for their 20th anniversary. She caught her reflection. Older, yes. Wrinkled, sure. But alive. She hadn't seen her eyes shine like that in decades. Say yes, she whispered. So she did. The event was 3 weeks away. She prepared with care. Not obsessively. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. But she wanted to be clear. She wasn't going there as a curiosity or a token older woman among tech elites. She was going as Mildred Whitaker, former schoolteacher, current firestarter. She wrote her speech in longhand first, as she always did, then typed it and trimmed it and read it out loud to the camcorder. She didn't memorize it. She internalized it. The day of the event arrived with the kind of clarity only certain mornings carry: cool air, quiet confidence, no noise in the head, only direction. She flew to Austin, greeted by an assistant from the foundation who held a sign that simply said, Mildred. No last name. Just her. As if they all already knew. The Future Frontiers Summit was larger than she expected. Thousands of attendees. Big screens. High-tech everything. Panels on AI, energy, longevity, space, and innovation. Elon wasn't present at every session, he appeared strategically, sparingly. But she spotted him walking the floor with quiet intensity, listening more than he spoke. She watched him from across the room once, just a moment, and something struck her. He wasn't larger than life. He was just a man who had refused to believe the rules about what couldn't be done. That's all. She had done the same, in her own quiet way. The two had never met, not yet. Her speech was scheduled just before the summit's closing keynote. She stood backstage, waiting, palms warm but steady. The host introduced her with genuine warmth. Next up, we're honored to welcome a woman who proves that reinvention doesn't belong to the young, it belongs to the willing. Please welcome Mildred Whitaker. She stepped onto the stage. The light blinded her for a moment, but she didn't flinch. She walked to the center, no notes in hand, just the speech inside her. And she began. They told me to slow down. They told me it was time to rest. They told me I had done enough. But what if enough wasn't the end? What if it was the middle? I'm Mildred Whittaker. I'm 68. I was a teacher. I was a wife. I was invisible for a long time. And then, I heard someone say that age is an asset, not a sentence. That we are not finished until we say so. And something inside me lit up. She paused. The room was quiet. Every face locked on hers. You don't need millions of dollars to launch something revolutionary. You just need to believe that the rules are negotiable. That the expiration date on relevance is a lie. I didn't start a company. I didn't invent a rocket. But I started a blog. I started walking again. I started healing my relationship with my daughter. I started seeing myself again. That's not small. That's a revolution. Another pause. She took a breath, softer this time. I'm not here to give you data or predictions. I'm here to remind you that every person you overlook, every aging neighbor, every gray-haired stranger, you're looking at the most underutilized source of wisdom, creativity, and resilience on this planet. She smiled. We are still dreaming. And now, finally, we're done waiting for permission. Applause rose like a wave. Not polite. Not performative. Real. People stood. Some even cried. When she walked off the stage, Elon Musk was standing just behind the curtain. He extended his hand. You said it better than I ever could, he told her. She shook his hand. I borrowed your spark, she said. Then made my own fire. He nodded, his face unreadable for a moment. Then, keep lighting it. That night, she didn't sleep much. She didn't need to. The fire inside her had made rest feel like a choice, not an escape. When she returned home, her daughter was waiting. Marianne hugged her tight. You're not who I thought you were, she said. No, Mildred replied. I'm who I was always meant to be. I just forgot for a while. The house was still old. The kitchen still creaked. But the woman inside it was new. And every day, she logged into her blog, still titled Still Dreaming, and welcomed a growing community of dreamers, doers, and late bloomers who no longer needed permission to matter. Mildred returned to Pine Hollow a different woman. The small town she drifted through felt new again, as though she'd put on glasses for the first time and seen the world in high definition. The post-summit glow lingered, not in her skin, but in her shoulders, her posture, the way she answered the door with ready eyes instead of a guarded heart. The first ripple came quietly. A woman from the local senior center, who'd never spoken to her before, recognized her from the Life Beyond Limits feature and approached with courage. Are you Mrs. Whittaker? I saw you on TV. Mildred smiled and nodded. They began to talk. We're organizing a weekly group called Fresh Starts, the woman said. Would you consider coming by? Mildred agreed. That afternoon, she walked into the senior center for the first time in nearly 15 years. The building smelled of coffee and bingo dust, the fading linoleum floor tiles patterned in dull sea foam green. A circle of folding chairs awaited. She chose one near the middle. The attendees ranged from 65 to 90, faces lined with stories, hands clasped in laps. No fanfare. No cameras. Just people. She began by telling them what she learned, that age is not a cage but a canvas, that dreams deferred are still dreams, that small acts can ignite huge change. She spoke of Elon Musk briefly, not as a guru, but as the spark that challenged her thinking. The response was instantaneous. Heads nodded. Eyes glistened. Someone asked, could we all write blog posts like you? Another asked, could we meet and share stories? So Fresh Starts was born. Every Thursday afternoon, a dozen seniors gathered in the center's common room. Mildred brought her laptop, her journal, and sometimes the old camcorder, encouraging attendees to record short personal stories. Some wrote. Some spoke. Some just listened. But every week, they practiced being seen again. Word spread through Pine Hollow. Soon the local newspaper ran a small article titled "Teacher Turns Seniors into Storytellers." Mildred's face smiled from the page again, and the community center staff told her sign-ups doubled in a month. But the spark widened beyond Pine Hollow. Through her blog, she began receiving emails from senior centers across the region, requests for speaking, offers to guest facilitate workshops. A woman in Ohio said Fresh Starts inspired her to launch her own Late Bloomers group. A man in Texas invited Mildred to a storytelling podcast for seniors. She declined some, accepted others. She didn't want to burn out. But she also felt a responsibility, even a calling, to keep encouraging. Interactions online deepened. People posted links on her blog to local meetups in California, Florida, Maine, places Mildred had never been. She realized she wasn't starting a movement. She was participating in one that already existed, quiet until someone lit it. Through Fresh Starts, people shared long-buried regrets, childhood losses, forgotten joys. Mary from Wisconsin brought her grandmother's quilt and spoke of sewing lessons lost to time. George from Alabama brought his old trumpet and played a note that reminded him of the swing band he abandoned in his 20s. Tears came easily in that room now, not of regret, but of recognition. The flesh and blood stories mattered more than any polished video. Meanwhile, Marianne had begun helping too. She visited almost every week, typing up transcriptions, editing audio, helping Mildred navigate Zoom calls with new groups. They spent hours laughing, arguing over font sizes, debating which stories were ready to share. Their walls weren't fixed yet, but they were rebuilding together. One Thursday evening, Marianne picked up a printed flyer, Fresh Starts, Pine Hollow Senior Storytelling Workshops. It had grown enough to fill a printed newsletter for the county, and Marianne looked at her mother and said, "This is incredible." "Only because people were ready," Mildred answered. But she still felt disbelief sometimes. She still woke up and thought, "I did this. Late. Unexpected. But here. Alive." One morning she received another email, this one from the head of a nonprofit in Boston called Ageless Voices. They wanted to partner with Fresh Starts, offering funding and resources to support workshops in libraries and retirement communities. The nonprofit also ran mentoring programs matching older adults with younger writers to co-create memoirs. It felt like a dream Tom never even allowed her to entertain, and yet here it was. She hesitated. The center in Boston was 2 states away. And funding came with structure, deadlines, expectations. But she spoke with the founder, who said simply, "We want to amplify your message. We just need a platform." That phrase echoed, amplify. That's what she'd wished for. Amplify the quiet stories that had once been ignored. She said yes. The partnership launched online. Within weeks, invitations poured in to host mini-conferences, retreats, webinars. People began calling her Late Bloom Muse, a title she accepted reluctantly but finally with grace. She realized the spark had widened. It wasn't just her life anymore. It belonged to anyone who once believed time had passed them by. Through Fresh Starts and Ageless Voices, stories poured in, hundreds of stories, reunions long overdue, songs sung again, art taken up after decades, reconciled relationships, new businesses started at 70. Across the country, late bloomers were choosing to begin again. Every email, every comment, every quiet phone call was a spark. And together, they created a blaze. Musk's original spark had illuminated one path for Mildred, but she had become instead a lantern for many. And in Pine Hollow, people referred to the old teacher as our catalyst. She still lived in the same house, walked the same streets, but nothing was quite the same. The rhythm of days shifted. Mornings included Zoom interviews, afternoons fresh starts workshops, evenings journal writing. She still found quiet hours, sometimes by the roses, sometimes under the stars, where she breathed and remembered how it felt to wake up in a dark house one morning and wonder if anything mattered. But now she knew it did. And that knowledge changed everything. Returning to Pine Hollow after the summit, Mildred felt the enthusiasm inside her skirt the way a breeze lifts feathers, but outside, skepticism hovered like storm clouds. Neighbors who once observed her routine with polite distance now offered glances heavy with question marks. At the grocery store, Mrs. Carmichael tapped her elbow and said, "Mildred, dear, I saw you on TV." That was quite something. Mildred nodded, uncertain whether to feel pride or imposter syndrome. Then a friend from church, faintly amused, asked over coffee if she'd lost her mind trying to be a celebrity at 68. A younger neighbor joked, "What's next, Mom? You launching rockets?" The laughter felt sharp. That night she lay awake, the question echoing, was she becoming ridiculous? Her blog was buzzing. Invitations arrived for speaking, panels, interviews. But doubt whispered that she'd overstepped, that she'd left her place. Her daughter Marianne sensed it too. During one quiet afternoon visit, Marianne looked at her over the cluttered dining table and asked gently, "Mom, are you okay with all this attention? Are you doing this because you feel you have to prove something?" The question stung, but it also made sense. Emotions tangled, she didn't want to look foolish, but she also didn't want to shrink back. She wanted to define what her life meant now. Quietly, irrepressibly. That night she returned to her journal, her growing map of possible new lives, flipping past the next stops and landing on the note, "Facing fear is part of this path." She wrote, "I'm not sure what's safe anymore, but I'm tired of safe being the same as silent." She closed the book and lay back. The next morning she logged in with renewed clarity. She posted transparency, "Some of you believe in me more than I do some days. I want to honor that belief, not run from it." She wrote about fear of being judged, fear of overreaching, fear of being forgotten again. And she invited readers to share theirs. The response was immediate. Late-life dreamers wrote that fear had stopped their plans for decades. Others shared stories of being dismissed by family or losing friends after they tried something new. Comments poured in, unsentimental and raw. A man from Kansas wrote, "My grandkids call me old. I'm 59. A woman from Maine wrote, "I wanted to paint. I was laughed at." Through that shared confession the weight of judgment, internal and external, lost its power. The blog became a place not only for inspiration but for honest conversation. Meanwhile Marianne stepped in more. She sat beside her mother and said, "Let's vet the invites. We can pick 2 or 3, only ones that feel right. You get to choose." That shift from isolation into partnership healed things even softer than words. They began scheduling only events that aligned with Mildred's values, community libraries, local TED-style talks, a regional convention on elder activism. When someone suggested she speak at a high-profile corporate event, Mildred declined. "That's not the spark I want to light," she told Marianne. And soon, people learned she meant it. One morning an organizer approached her about joining a tech company panel, brimming with younger innovators who might glaze over her. "We can feature you as wisdom from experience," they suggested. Mildred declined again. She didn't want to be tokenized. Better to light 10 kitchens than sit in a rarefied boardroom. Through fresh starts, skeptics changed too. One Thursday the director of the local senior center, who had once rolled her eyes at the idea of workshops, paused after class and said, quietly, "I judged you before. But I see now, this matters." Mildred smiled, recognizing the same transformation she felt within. Facing skepticism wasn't about proving them wrong, but simply continuing. Each invitation she accepted or declined reinforced her boundaries, her purpose, her authenticity. And each blog post that shared fear and reciprocity strengthened community trust. She realized the real barrier wasn't age, nor attention, nor judgment, it was silence and shame. She said so plainly, the biggest limit we face is the one we build in our heads. That chapter of her life closed with her standing in her garden at sunset, voice calm, not triumphant, just steady. She said into the camcorder, I am not shrinking. I'm choosing what matters. Then she walked inside, knowing the spark still burned, unshakable even when doubts reappeared. Mildred carried her growing world with quiet intention, blog, fresh starts, speaking invitations, emails from across the country. But underneath it all lay a practical problem she hadn't fully confronted, technology. She'd managed with Marianne's help, Zoom calls, uploading videos, editing captions, but every click carried friction, every new platform felt like pushing uphill. One afternoon as she struggled to embed audio into the blog, she received an email from an address she didn't recognize, Jeremy@spacex.com. Her heart picked up. It was that Jeremy, from Mississippi. Orphaned after kindergarten and bright-eyed in her classroom, who had written to NASA and eventually joined SpaceX. He'd told her once that seeing her believe in him changed his life. Now he wrote, Mrs. Whitaker, I hope this message finds you well. I've been following your blog and Fresh Starts workshops with great admiration. I'd love to offer some help, hosting your blog on a simple platform, teaching basic editing, maybe setting up a podcast feed for the stories you're sharing. I'm not a professional web developer, but I've built some tools at SpaceX, and I'd be honored to help you use them. Mildred's breath caught. An ally she never expected. For a moment she hesitated. She didn't want to impose or appear needy. She'd built this life on her own terms. But then she thought about the early days of teaching, when she had offered every student encouragement she could muster. Jeremy had responded to that, years later. She realized acceptance wouldn't diminish her, it would build deeper connection. She replied simply, thank you. I'd be honored. Jeremy's assistants arrived just days later. He logged in remotely and coached Mildred in a video call, patient and encouraging. He helped her switch to a more user-friendly platform, backed up her site, optimized her video embeds, and even taught her how to track analytics so she could see where commenters were coming from. More than the tech, he taught her confidence with tools she'd long feared. A few weeks later he sent another email, I was thinking, we could record a short podcast episode together. Just a conversation. You talk, I ask, we help listeners understand what Fresh Starts is and why it matters. She hesitated again. Podcast? Sounds beyond her comfort zone. But he said, think of it as the camcorder in the garage. We're just talking. So they did. Jeremy and Mildred recorded in her living room one afternoon, chairs angled toward each other, the camcorder perched between them for old time's sake. She shared stories, Tom's rock collection, the travel journal pages she finally filled, Fresh Starts workshops where someone dusted off an accordion to play again. Jeremy listened, laughed, asked questions that made her dig deeper. The conversation felt like stepping into a memory, and shaping a new one. When the episode went live, download numbers surprised her, it reached people she'd never see. Senior centers, libraries, newsrooms, book clubs. Each download was like a handshake across distance. But Jeremy gave more than technical help, he gave intergenerational connection, repairing time's distance. One Saturday afternoon, Marianne joined them for a three-way call. Jeremy asked if she'd like to read some stories live, and she agreed. He trained them both on Zoom hosting etiquette, sound checks, screen share. Watching her daughter speak for the first time about editing her mother's story felt like closing a loop. Years of drift began dissolving in shared purpose. In the months that followed, Fresh Starts evolved. Jeremy and Marianne helped integrate simple podcast episodes, Zoom guest storytelling nights, and even a mentor match program where participants from an older generation paired with younger volunteers to co-author memoir pieces. The technology once daunting became a bridge, not a barrier. Visitors from the blog came to check it out and often stayed. Mildred welcomed an email from a couple in Seattle. They wrote, "We'd like to start a Fresh Starts little group in our neighborhood library. Jeremy helped us with the Zoom setup. Thank you for including all of us." That line, "Jeremy helped us," felt like both surprise and joy. The spark had widened beyond expectation. More than that, unexpected allies had shown up. Through Fresh Starts, age diversity became a feature, not a footnote. A granddaughter of one participant joined the mentor match. She typed her own story, walked her grandmother through it, laughed together at typos, cried together at memories. A retired engineer in Florida sent a box of headphones labeled, "For recording stories." A college student in Boston interviewed Mary from Wisconsin about quilting and broadcast the story as part of a creative writing class. One evening, Mildred reflected on this shift, how what began in her quiet kitchen had become a network of living threads. Threads of friendship, mentorship, shared purpose. She wrote in her journal, "I thought I was just one voice. But every time someone reaches out to help, they add to the song." And that song grew louder. Jeremy visited in person for the first time. He arrived with 2 tacos in hand, his favorite lunch from a local food truck, and sat at her kitchen table with Marianne. They joked, edited transcripts, and then sat in quiet. The sun poured in through the window, and Mildred saw something in her daughter's face, pride. That afternoon they walked to the garden together. Jeremy helped trim a rosebush, and Marianne carried the clippings in a glass jar. They posed for a photo, the 3 of them smiling, the past, the present, the future in one frame. Later, he sent that photo to the blog, captioned 3 generations dreaming together. Comments flooded. "I wish my grandson was like that. Thank you for showing us what kindness looks like. What a gift." In that moment, Mildred saw more clearly than ever, the unexpected ally wasn't just Jeremy. It was connection in every form, with people, with tools, with stories across time and distance. And all of it pushed her movement forward. She didn't need to do it alone anymore. The journey expanded, not because she chased growth, but because she invited others in. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? For as long as she could remember, Mildred had dreamed of travel, just small steps really, a road trip, a train ride, a weekend away somewhere her journal had named. But it had remained words, ink on paper, because life is skilled at postponing dreams until they feel impossible. Now, with fresh starts, blog views, speaking invitations, her connection with Marianne and Jeremy and countless others, the idea of travel didn't seem impossible. It seemed necessary. One Tuesday morning she opened her journal to the Next Stops section and stared at the words, "Visit Jeremy at SpaceX and see the Pacific Coast." She knew the priorities, reconciling with Marianne already felt underway, helping Fresh Starts expand was ongoing. But the road trip was a promise to herself and a living symbol for others, you can begin again even after 60. She brought up the map that accompanied her travel notebook. It was the same one she'd once timidly marked with red circles decades ago. Now she circled West Coast cities she'd never seen, San Francisco, Seattle, redwood forests, the ocean. She made a list of stops, Magnolia Street in Seattle to hear jazz, a ferry ride from San Francisco Bay, Big Sur coastline, Yosemite in autumn, maybe even a train ride on the Coast Starlight Line. She could feel the rhythm of travel in her bones. She called Jeremy in advance, he would visit and show her around at SpaceX, help arrange visits. Marianne offered to handle most logistics, car rental or train booking, lodging, route planning, but insisted Mildred choose the itinerary. That mattered. Then she heard from Fresh Starts participants, some from Oregon, California, inviting her to give a talk at their local workshop gatherings if she passed through. She realized it wouldn't just be a journey for her, it could be a traveling extension of the movement she'd started, personal stories and community building on wheels. It felt alive and purposeful. She drafted a plan in the journal. Week 1. Fly to Seattle, meet Jeremy at SpaceX, talk at local senior meetup. Week 2, ferry to San Francisco, talk at Nancy's reading group, train to Big Sur. Week 3, Yosemite, lakeside writing retreat, weekend return home. She filled in approximate dates, distances, lodging notes, key contacts, expenses. Then she waited. Not out of doubt, but to let the idea settle. What if something broke down? What if the invitations were too many? What if she backed out? She tried to imagine being back at the kitchen table with no trip, and something in her rebelled. The trip wasn't just about seeing places anymore, it was a message to every late bloomer who thought they lacked permission. She told Marianne, if plans change, I'll refund all the registrations and go home. But I want to try. Marianne squeezed her hand and said, that's brave, and helpfully added, I'll sleep easier if you let me research Ubers near hotels and train cancellations policies. Mildred laughed. Part of her joy was letting someone measure the age-appropriate insurance details, while she just chose coastlines. 2 weeks before departure she published a blog post titled Road Trip of a Lifetime, with purpose. She wrote, I am planning a journey I should have taken decades ago. But I won't wait any longer. I'll drive and ride and walk and talk. I'll meet people who found their spark, and tell stories along the way. And if you're reading this, maybe you're long past an expiration date you accepted. Maybe it's your time too. Let's begin again. Emails poured in with advice, best scenic stops, cheap motels, great diners, routes to avoid, stories to hear. A woman from Sacramento wrote, if you stop in Tahoe, let me know. I'd love to hear your story. A man from San Diego offered to autograph the Fresh Starts banner at a meetup. Each message was a new thread to stitch into the road trip's tapestry. On the morning of departure, Marianne drove Mildred to the airport. Her carry-on bag was small and neat, the travel journal tucked under the seat. She felt nervous but not scared, curious, as though the trip belonged to the person she used to be and the person she'd become. She hugged Marianne tight before security. Marianne whispered, tell me the best parts when you get back. I will, Mildred said, voice steady. She boarded the plane. The hum of engines felt like possibility. The first stop was Seattle. When she stepped off the plane into the cool Pacific Northwest air, she felt it deep in her bones, the shock of altitude, the smell of pine, the bustle of new faces. Jeremy was there with a small bouquet of daisies and a sandwich from her favorite deli, Mexican torta, just like she'd once described. She laughed, teary-eyed. They drove to SpaceX in a sleek autonomous shuttle Jeremy had arranged. Everything about the campus felt futuristic yet human, a blend of tech and purpose. He gave her a 1-hour tour, pointing out rockets and engineers, reminding her, you taught me to write to NASA. Now I help build rockets. She smiled wide. He introduced her to a few team members. One engineer, hearing about Fresh Starts, said he'd connect her with a senior mentorship program they ran in the city. Outside, she stood with her journal and wrote on a blank page, Chapter 1, Seattle. I felt small, then seen. That evening she spoke at a small gathering at a senior center in Bellevue. 20 people listened, some with tears, some with smiles, some with phones out recording. Afterward they shared their own dreams under lamplight. One woman said she'd bake pies and sell them to support her granddaughter's college fund. Another man admitted he wanted to try kayaking. When she boarded the ferry the next morning across Puget Sound, the water rippled toward the horizon, the air crisp and free. She watched islands pass and wrote, salt water and wind remind me what movement feels like. She arrived in San Francisco by late afternoon. The Golden Gate Bridge emerged like a promise through the fog. She checked into a small hotel overlooking the bay where seagulls circled, ferry horns echoed, light danced on waves. That evening she met Nancy, a blog reader who invited her to a community book group meeting in a library. They greeted her with tea and pastries. She shared her story, then listened. People spoke of lost chances, of bold ideas paused that felt too late. Nancy handed her a note from a librarian across the aisle, "You have inspired me to start writing again." Downtown on the wharf she walked barefoot, in shoes, on wooden planks, feeling the sea under her soles, the wind on her face. She wrote on a sticky note, Chapter 2, San Francisco. I felt wind again. She found a quiet radio station interviewing her live, and she spoke into the microphone as though writing in the air, "We are not fading. We're shifting. Not backward, but forward." That night she slept with the curtain drawn open, watching city lights and harbor darkness. She dreamed of redwoods and train rides, grandchildren she might never have, reconciliation still blossoming. The next morning she boarded the Coast Starlight train heading south, the slow hum of wheels on tracks like a heartbeat. She watched farmland roll past, mountains rise, oceans reappear. She wrote in the journal, "Train hum is hope." She arrived in Big Sur just before sunset. The Pacific crashed against cliffs in endless pattern. She hiked a short trail, just far enough to feel elevation in lungs and in spirit. If the trip was about purpose, it was also about proving her body still carried joy. A woman on the trail asked if she was alone. When Mildred said yes, the woman smiled, "Then this is your pilgrimage." And in some way it was. She slept beneath stars in a cabin with a roaring fireplace, journal beside her bed. The next day she drove inland to Yosemite, the roads winding through golden hills. She filled her lungs with pine and altitude, the vast granite cliffs reminding her how small moments lead to vast horizons. She sat near a waterfall, dipped her hand in cold rushing water, and wrote, Chapter 3, Yosemite. My heart still remembers wonder. Words and wind and water gave her courage. On the drive home she spoke at one more community center, a small audience under oak beams and sunlight. They cheered when she finished. She smiled with tears. And then she began her journey home. The flight back felt different. She was lighter, not because weight had left her body but because heaviness had. She had walked coastlines. She had met strangers who believed. She'd seen what was possible. At home Marianne decorated the kitchen with mini flags, Our traveler came home, they read. Marianne had baked a small apple pie and placed it fresh on the windowsill. The house, once silent, felt full. That night they sat at the table, peers and curriculum dreams turned into maps on the wall. Marianne asked quietly, what was the best part? Mildred took a bite of pie and looked out the window, the roses Tom planted still bloomed. She tapped the journal. The best part was choosing to go. And though she'd driven hundreds of miles and flown across the country, the real journey was the one she had taken inside. Mildred returned from her road trip changed in ways she couldn't yet name, her journals filled with place names and small epiphanies, her heart fuller with proof of possibility. But the journey wasn't over. It was just beginning. Fresh Starts expanded into something geographically and emotionally broader. Marianne and Jeremy built an online platform where people from across the U.S. could join virtual, story circles, connecting late bloomers through video calls, images, audio clips, not polished content but authentic conversation. The first virtual story circle was chaotic, slow connections, coughs and hesitations, muted mics, disembodied voices in boxes. But then, like sparks catching on dry grass, it clicked. A woman named Evelyn from Ohio described relearning piano, a man in Oregon spoke about baking bread again, someone in Florida shared a poem, shaky but true. Someone said, your voice matters, and the echo reminded them all that it did. These gatherings became gentle pulse points for connection and non-judgmental courage. Meanwhile, after the trip, newspapers and podcasts still occasionally featured Mildred's story, but she no longer chased more media mentions. She championed consistency over spectacle. Fresh Starts chapters began forming in various towns, Detroit, Albuquerque, coastal Maine, and each one sent their stories back to the blog, photos of group meetings, quotes about late-in-life reinvention, homemade creative expressions, and heartfelt comments. One group in Vermont began crafting embroidered, permission patches that read "In progress." People wore them on jackets at workshops. Someone joked, "Aging, still crafting, still blooming in stitches." The sentiment struck Mildred. Craft and community, once tucked behind her as a private memory, now running through communities. One cold afternoon, she sat at the kitchen table with her travel journal, which by now was frayed and full, pages marked with stories she'd lived and histories she'd made, and wrote 2 words in a big, bold hand: "You came back." She smiled. She had. But why? Out on her back porch, she planted a new rosebush, a deep pink one named Resilience, a gift from one of the Fresh Starts groups, its thorns confident and petals energetic. She pressed it into the soil, memories of Tom's garden weaving around it. Outside, the streetlight cast gold over evening dew. She stayed by that plant longer than she meant to, tracing the petals with a finger and whispering, "Welcome." That night, Marianne read aloud emails from people who said the movement had given them something they thought they lost: voice, connection, relevance. There was someone in Texas who had started a night school for neighbors to teach skills they thought were obsolete, someone in Chicago who formed a band of seniors to play together in retirement homes. The late bloomers were doing more than dreaming, they were making. That was the ultimate inheritance. Meanwhile, Jeremy continued as her tech ally but also called regularly just to listen. Online calls with him and Marianne turned sometimes into family dinners over video chat, holding up tea cups, comparing recipes, laughing at mismatched cups and screen lags. One afternoon, he surprised her with a short video he made, clips from Fresh Starts workshops, faces lighting up, hands raised, stories being recorded. He titled it "Still Dreaming, Ripples." When she watched it, the tears she shed weren't about loss, they were about having a hand in something living and spreading. A few Fridays later, at a Fresh Starts meeting live in person in Pine Hollow, she told the group. "The journey began when I stopped listening to the voice that said I was done." A small applause followed, not for her, but for themselves. Milestones followed quietly. She spoke at a virtual university symposium on aging and creativity, co-authored a small ebook of collected stories with contributions from all over, even let Marianne film a short documentary about the Fresh Start story, with titles like "Never Too Late." None of it was flashy, but all of it was steady. Inside, however, not everything was certain. Sometimes she'd wake before dawn, heart pounding, with an ache in her chest. "More?" it asked. "Can you do more, or are you tired?" She'd rise, walk down the hall, and open the journal. She'd flip to earlier entries, Chapter 1, Seattle, read the excitement, the shaking in her hands. Then she turned to the newer pages, the ebook notes, the emails, the flicker of movement around her, and she'd write, "Still dreaming, still walking." That word "still" was new on her tongue. Once, still meant unmoving, slow, fading. Now it meant continuity, living, becoming. One Sunday afternoon, she joined a story circle that included a woman in her 80s in Louisiana who said, "I thought life was only about holding on. Now I see it's about reaching." That sentence moved Mildred in a way none of the praise ever had. They were reaching, together. She typed a quick reply, "Yes. You are still reaching." And then she closed her laptop and picked up the journal to write on a fresh page, because this chapter wasn't a full stop, and never would be. The morning after her return felt normal, but underneath the routines pulsed something fragile. She opened her laptop to begin a post, but the site was down. Panic rose. Marianne called, "Server issues." Jeremy hesitated, maybe a cyber attack. The tech glitch felt symbolic. Her movement paused in silence. Fear whispered, "What if it all collapses? What if the spark burns out?" She reclined in her chair, journal open on her lap. Failure is an option here. If things are not failing, you are not innovating enough, Elon Musk had said. Suddenly, the failure felt real, not theoretical. The blog was dead for hours, then days. The platform crashed again after Jeremy patched it. A newsletter mailing list vanished. Fresh Start's Zoom events lagged or froze. Emails bounced. Competitors online questioned the sustainability of her project. Commentary from some readers turned critical: "This is too much, why can't she retire quietly?" Even Marianne voiced concern: "Mom, this feels overwhelming now." The inner war flared: was she overdoing it? Was age no excuse for mistakes? She closed her eyes. The setback wasn't just technical. It was emotional. It hurt. But she sat upright. Persistence is very important. "You should not give up unless you are forced to give up," Musk had said. She read that again slowly. She whispered, "We will persist." She posted to social media with honesty: "We hit a wall. The blog crashed, the site is down. I'm frustrated, scared, tired. But I believe in this spark. We'll rebuild." Comments filled with encouragement. Some offered hosting help, others reassured her the message mattered more than uptime. Fresh Start's Zoom group participants sent recorded messages: "Still here, still dreaming." That night, Marianne and Jeremy came over. They huddled around the kitchen table, pizza boxes open, screens up. Jeremy showed code errors, backups. Marianne drafted an email apology and timeline for subscribers. They worked late. When they paused, Marianne reached across and squeezed her mother's hand. "Mom, we're in this with you." That felt like a reset. Next morning, Mildred wrote a post titled "Our Spark Doesn't Quit." She acknowledged fear, asked the community, "What holds you back? Let's talk about it." Responses poured in: stories of failed marriages, abandoned art, dreams postponed. She realized setbacks weren't just technical, they were universal, all part of growth. Thousands wrote back. Old and new readers alike shared analogous hits: missing deadlines, health scares, jobs lost, loss of loved ones. And the pattern emerged: setback leads to fear, fear leads to silence, silence becomes resignation. But if someone says, "I'm broken too but choosing again," it changes the equation. The platform relaunch followed, with Jeremy in the lead. Marianne narrated tutorial videos: how to back up your blog, what to do when tech fails, designed for seniors facing similar nightmares. Fresh Start sessions included conversations about failure, why it's part of starting over, and how to bounce back. Even local newspaper ran a feature. From crash to comeback, the real story behind "Still Dreaming." That piece quoted Elon's line: "If something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor." For Mildred, the setback became a lesson. Not humiliation, but calibration. She retraced lessons Musk modeled: seek feedback, build with fundamentals, iterate fast, don't optimize too long before launch. Above all, she held to a value: vulnerability invites strength. Weeks later, she sat in a Fresh Start circle and shared the glitch story out loud, voice steady. Tears came from several participants, not of pity, but of solidarity. One man from Michigan said, "My spouse left me last year, and I felt broken. But I'm still going to start my painting class." A woman from Idaho, "I lost my home. But I still have my story." The room trembled with courage. Setbacks had woven connection. 2 months after the crash, the site was stronger. A community tech team of volunteers, some university students, offered pro bono help refining the platform. Ageless Voices nonprofit offered support for digital resilience workshops. Membership in Fresh Starts doubled. But more importantly, the tone had changed: people expected setbacks, and planned for them. They shared fear. They shared bounce back. Resilience became the theme. Mildred sat that evening in her garden under stars, journal open. She wrote, Chapter 12, The Setback. Then, not the end, just the bend in the road. The roses glowed silver in moonlight, steady even in wind. And she whispered, "We still dream." Returning to Pine Hollow after the setbacks and rebuilding chapter, Mildred felt a quiet invitation to mend the most delicate connection of all, her relationship with Marianne. The road trip had opened a door, the summit had cracked a wall, but full healing still rested behind gentle uncertainty. One afternoon, as the sun fell soft through the curtains, Marianne called. "Mom, I've been thinking," she said, voice careful. "Would you consider reading some of your journal entries, out loud, at the next Fresh Starts meeting?" Mildred's heart curled. Reading aloud felt vulnerable, exposing pages written in private grief and hope. But hope, she'd learned, often demands that we step into vulnerability. Besides, Elon Musk had said, failure is an option here. If things are not failing, you are not innovating enough. She thought of emotional risk as innovation, trying again, even when the outcome isn't guaranteed. She said yes. That Thursday, the circle seated in the senior center felt like something larger, not just community, but ritual. Marianne sat beside her, holding her hand. Mildred opened the journal to a double spread of early entries: Seattle, the ferry across Puget Sound, Big Sur Cliffs. She cleared her throat and began, August 7th, I heard something that made me feel alive again. Her voice trembled, thick with memory. She read about the call from Marianne that first time, her daughter's apology, her own response, "We don't have to fix everything today." Eyes around the circle glistened, people nodded. When she paused, Marianne whispered quietly, "It's okay." Words spilled from Mildred then, unpolished, soulful, about grief and love, regret and courage. The group responded with gentle applause. That moment felt less like a performance and more like a shared confession. Afterwards, Marianne asked if they might record a short podcast together. Mother and daughter sharing memory, reconciliation, purpose. Inspired by Jeremy's guidance, they set up microphones in the garage that weekend and began. Marianne's questions were tender. What scared you most about sharing your voice again? Mildred's answer stretched across years. Silence felt safe. But it wasn't freedom. Their recorded conversation became episode 2 of Fresh Starts podcast. When it aired, many listeners wrote, "Your story helped me begin mending with my own son." Inside the house, walls began to feel porous. Not weak, but responsive. One evening, after that recording, Marianne found an old scrapbook of family photos, wedding day, school recitals, birthday cakes, hidden behind boxes. They looked at them together. No shame. Just time acknowledged, gratitude in small frames. They laughed at hairstyles, remembered joys. Then Marianne asked gently, "Would you want me to help post this, maybe a photo montage?" And Mildred said yes. The next week, she put a photo strip on the blog titled Family, Remembered and Reclaimed. Comments poured in with shared memories of lost greetings, rekindled bonds, new beginnings. One reader said, "I reconnected with my sister after 20 years of silence, all because I read your blog to her on the phone." Meanwhile, Fresh Starts continued growing. A small grant from Ageless Voices funded professional audio equipment for participants who wished to record their stories. One afternoon, at a workshop in Pine Hollow Library, a woman in her late 70s read a love letter she'd never mailed to her husband. Another man painted a skyline he once sketched at age 16. Marianne noticed the energy. People leaning into vulnerability, linking arms across empty years, building small breaths of trust. One teenage volunteer whispered to Marianne, "My grandmother never speaks like this at home." It's like she finally found permission. Marianne squeezed her mother's shoulder. The reunion chapter wasn't just personal, it was communal. Then came a quiet invitation. The high school where Mildred had taught asked her to lead an evening event for retirees and former staff, to talk about reinvention after retirement. She hesitated. School hallways held ghosts, of chalk dust, recess bells, lesson plans collected in piles. But she accepted. She entered the old auditorium under dimmed lights, pinking along the edge of memories. Former colleagues greeted her with hugs. Students, now adults in their 30s and 40s, sat in the chairs she once occupied. She pulled the camcorder out of her bag and said, "This is not about nostalgia. It's about what comes next, even 30 years after you stop teaching." She spoke about, when something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor. That line, inspired by Musk, had echoed across her journey. Later, a former student, now a nurse, stood to speak. She said, "I didn't know why I left teaching. But hearing you talk tonight, I want to start again, on my own terms." That room hummed with echoes of purpose found and unforgotten. Through the weeks that followed, mother and daughter turned routine evenings into co-hosted live Q&A sessions, online and in person, about reconciling with adult children, rebuilding trust, creating new rituals. People poured stories, reunions with siblings, reaching out after divorce, repairing friendships that fractured. One woman wrote, "My husband and I began living together again after years apart, because you showed that mending is an act, not magic." Chapter 13 closed in the kitchen where so much had shifted. Marianne baked a batch of chocolate oatmeal cookies, Tom's favorite recipe, and they sat together, journal open between them. Mildred tapped the page, Chapter 13, the reunion. And then, not ending. But healing continued. She raised a cookie, to continuing, to being known, again. Marianne nodded, eyes glistening, to coming home. After the reunion with Marianne and the healing it brought, Mildred felt a growing urge to look beyond her immediate circle, to stretch her impact, to dream in bigger frames. The setbacks and reunions had shown her that change was messy and gradual, but it was possible. And as Elon Musk had once said, when something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor. She began to envision fresh starts as more than a blog or a series of local meetings. It could be a national movement, a force to challenge society's idea of aging itself. She discussed this with Marianne and Jeremy during their weekly video calls. Jeremy's eyes lit up with tech possibilities, apps, podcasts, digital storytelling tools designed specifically for older adults. Marianne envisioned partnerships with senior centers, libraries, and universities. "What if we called it the New Vision Project?" she suggested, a platform not just for telling stories but for creating new ones, learning, mentoring, building. Mildred loved the idea. She drafted a manifesto. The new vision is about radical reinvention at any age. It is about breaking through the limits society puts on us. It is about dreaming big, starting small, and building relentlessly. She published the manifesto online, inviting people across America to join. The response was immediate and profound. Emails flooded in from veterans wanting to teach skills, retired engineers eager to mentor, artists who'd stopped creating, entrepreneurs who felt shut out by age. One man from Alabama wrote, "I always thought I was done after 65. Now I'm designing solar panels with my grandson." A woman in Vermont said, "I'm starting a community garden that includes teaching kids and seniors to grow together." The new vision was catching fire. At the same time, Mildred pushed herself to think even bigger. Inspired by Musk's audacity in space exploration and renewable energy, she reached out to local university professors, proposing a research collaboration on aging and creativity. The response was warmer than she expected. Soon, she was invited to speak at a conference on gerontology and innovation. Standing at the podium, with the audience of scientists, caregivers, and activists before her, Mildred shared her story, not just as a personal journey but as a call to reimagine what aging means. She quoted Elon Musk, "Some people don't like change, but you need to embrace change if the alternative is disaster," brainyquote.com. She argued that aging, often seen as decline, could be redefined as a stage of growth, creativity, and radical contribution. The talk was met with applause, and afterward, a professor approached her, "We'd love to partner on a study about how community projects like yours impact cognitive health." Mildred felt buoyed by the possibility. Meanwhile, Fresh Start's chapters began adopting the New Vision project name, reflecting a shift from merely telling stories to actively building futures. Marianne helped create online courses, everything from digital literacy for seniors to entrepreneurial boot camps. Jeremy designed a mentorship app connecting younger and older generations. These projects echoed Musk's approach: iteration, bold vision, and building with community feedback. Still, challenges remained. Funding was always tight, tech glitches still appeared, doubts sometimes crept in. But Mildred remembered Musk's mindset: persistence is very important. You should not give up unless you are forced to give up. She reminded herself daily. One afternoon, she walked through Pine Hollow's park, noting elderly couples on benches, children playing, joggers passing by. She imagined how many untold stories, unrealized dreams surrounded her. With renewed purpose, she began writing grant applications for expanding the New Vision nationally, proposing partnerships with nonprofits and local governments. She knew that scaling meant not just growth in numbers but deepening impact, helping seniors reclaim agency and joy in tangible ways. Back at home, she started a new journal, titled Simply Vision. She filled pages with sketches, ideas, goals, quotes. One favorite: "I think it is possible for ordinary people to choose to be extraordinary." Another Musk insight, Goodreads.com. The journal became a space of possibility, where she dreamt beyond fear. The local library agreed to host a monthly New Vision Salon, an open space for seniors to share projects, brainstorm, learn. The first salon was nervous but hopeful. People brought homemade crafts, poems, startup ideas, gardening tips. Marianne helped record it all, sharing snippets on social media. Slowly, the salon grew in attendance and energy. One woman announced plans for a senior-led environmental group, a retired firefighter started a safety workshop. Mildred realized that what began as a blog had transformed into a living ecosystem of creativity and connection. On a crisp autumn evening, she sat by the fire with Marianne and Jeremy, reviewing the year's progress. They laughed over setbacks and cheered small victories. "Look at how far we've come," Marianne said softly. "It's just the beginning." Mildred nodded. Elon Musk once said, "When Henry Ford made cheap, reliable cars, people said, 'Nah, what's wrong with a horse?' That was a huge bet he made, and it worked. We're making our own bet." Jeremy smiled, "And it's paying off." As the fire crackled, Mildred wrote the chapter's closing words in her journal. The New Vision is not just a dream. It's a choice. To defy expectations, to build, to persist, to transform. This is our time. The next morning, she sent out an invitation for the upcoming New Vision Summit, an online gathering of seniors, partners, volunteers, all dedicated to expanding what was possible. The summit would feature workshops, talks, and panels, including an interview with a retired NASA engineer who spoke about lifelong innovation. As she pressed send, Mildred felt a quiet thrill. The movement was growing, alive and rooted in purpose. Elon Musk's words remained a beacon: "I think that's the single best piece of advice. Constantly think about how you could be doing things better and questioning yourself." BrainyQuote.com, she was doing that, questioning, dreaming, building. The new vision was clear: age was not an ending but a frontier. And Mildred was ready to lead the way. The morning of the New Vision Summit dawned clear and bright over Pine Hollow. Mildred woke with a quiet excitement pulsing through her veins. This was more than just an event, it was a declaration. After months of planning, reaching out, and gathering voices from across the country, today would be the moment to show the world that aging was not a quiet surrender but a bold revolution. The living room was transformed into a makeshift broadcast studio. Soft light spilled over a cluttered desk where a laptop, microphone, and ring light stood ready. Marianne, perched nearby with notes, smiled at Mildred's nervous energy. "You've got this," she said. Mildred took a deep breath and repeated a phrase she'd come to hold close, one of Elon Musk's mantras: "Persistence is very important. You should not give up unless you are forced to give up." The summit opened with a montage of stories submitted by participants, a retired teacher launching a community library, a veteran starting a bike repair shop, an artist painting murals in her town. Faces of determination and joy flickered on screen, each a testament to the spark that had been ignited. When it was Mildred's turn to speak, she felt the weight of all those stories behind her. She began by sharing her own journey. The loneliness, the fear of fading away, the moment when Elon Musk's words challenged her to rethink what was possible. "Age isn't a cage," she said, voice steady. "It's a launching pad." The chat window filled instantly with comments, people from coast to coast sharing their own small victories, their doubts, their hopes. Marianne skillfully guided the Q&A, weaving personal stories into the conversation and deepening the connection between participants. A highlight came when a former NASA engineer, now in his 70s, shared his story of reinventing himself as a sustainable energy consultant. "Innovation doesn't retire," he said, echoing a sentiment Musk often expressed. "Some people don't like change, but you need to embrace change if the alternative is disaster." BrainyQuote.com, the engineer's words struck a chord with Mildred. This was precisely what she wanted to convey, the urgent need to redefine what aging meant, not just personally but societally. Throughout the day, workshops unfolded on everything from digital literacy to creative entrepreneurship. Participants shared screens, swapped ideas, and even collaborated on new projects. One breakout session featured a 70-year-old woman teaching how to build raised garden beds, while another hosted a discussion on mental health and resilience. The energy was electric. Yet, even amid the enthusiasm, Mildred felt the familiar pang of doubt. Could this movement reach beyond the online crowd? Could it change the hardened attitudes that dismissed older adults as relics of the past? But then a message popped up in the chat: "My daughter finally saw me in a new light today. Thank you." That single message rekindled her hope. The summit closed with a call to action, not for passive hope but for bold steps. "What is one thing you will do tomorrow to keep this fire burning?" Marianne asked. Comments poured in, some pledged to start a blog, others to reconnect with family, some vowed to learn new skills or volunteer. That night, after the cameras went off and the chat rooms emptied, Mildred sat by the window, gazing at the stars. Elon Musk's vision of reaching beyond the sky felt symbolic now. She whispered softly, "If Henry Ford could change the world by betting on the impossible, then so can we." The New Vision Summit wasn't the end but a powerful new beginning, a beacon for those who refused to be defined by age, who dared to dream and build anew. And Mildred, once quiet and fading, was now a radiant light in that constellation. Days after the New Vision Summit, Mildred felt a mixture of exhilaration and exhaustion. The summit had been a success, but the real work was just beginning. Emails and messages flooded in, each one a thread weaving a growing tapestry of stories, ideas, and partnerships. Yet beneath the surge of enthusiasm, Mildred wrestled with a familiar question that had haunted her for years: was she truly making a difference, or was this all just a brief flicker before fading again? One chilly morning, as frost clung to the windowpanes of her kitchen, she sat with her journal and reread the words that had sparked her transformation: "When something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor." Elon Musk's voice echoed in her mind. That phrase was a call to courage, a reminder that the path to change was never smooth or certain. Determined to push forward, Mildred decided it was time for the next bold step. She would organize a community project that brought the ideas of the new vision into the physical world, a garden that would be both a sanctuary and a symbol of growth for seniors and youth alike. She reached out to the local parks department and secured a small plot of land in the heart of Pine Hollow. The vision was clear. A multi-generational garden where stories could be shared as seeds were planted, where hands of different ages worked side by side. Word spread quickly. Volunteers from every corner of the town, retirees, parents, teenagers, signed up. Even some skeptics began to ask questions, curious about the project that seemed to carry a quiet but unstoppable energy. On the first day, Mildred stood among the circle of hands, earth-stained and eager, feeling the weight of possibility. As they dug, planted, and laughed. She thought about Elon Musk's relentless drive. Persistence is very important. You should not give up unless you are forced to give up. That persistence was the backbone of every small victory here. But challenges soon emerged. Some neighbors worried about the maintenance, others doubted the project's relevance. One day, Mildred received a curt letter from the city council questioning the garden's long-term sustainability. It was a blow, but not a defeat. She gathered the volunteers for a meeting and shared the letter openly. "We've faced setbacks before," she reminded them. "But setbacks are just part of building something worthwhile." Marianne helped organize a petition and reached out to local media. Soon, news stories highlighted the garden as a beacon of community and innovation. Letters of support poured in from seniors and parents inspired by the vision. A local high school even offered to integrate the garden into its curriculum, bringing science and history to life for students. Slowly, the tide turned. The city council not only withdrew its objections but agreed to provide funding for garden tools and educational programs. That victory was sweeter than Mildred expected, not just because it secured the project's future, but because it showed the power of collective voice and resilience. The garden blossomed, just as the community around it did. One afternoon, as the sun warmed the soil, a young boy named Lucas approached Mildred. "I like planting with you," he said shyly. "My grandma says you're helping people remember things." Mildred smiled, touched by the simple truth. "We're growing more than plants, Lucas. We're growing hope." That moment became a quiet turning point. The garden was no longer just a project, it was a living legacy. Back at home, Mildred reflected on the journey from isolation to connection, from fear to action. She penned a new blog post titled "The Turning Point," sharing not only the garden's story but the deeper lesson, that change requires both vision and grit, and that no one is too old to plant new seeds. She ended with a quote from Musk that had guided her all along: "I think that's the single best piece of advice. Constantly think about how you could be doing things better and questioning yourself." BrainyQuote.com, the response was overwhelming. Readers from across the country wrote about their own turning points, their gardens, their breakthroughs. Some said the story gave them courage to face their own doubts. Mildred knew the journey was far from over, but the turning point was clear: she had found her voice, her purpose, and a community ready to grow alongside her. And in that, she discovered the true power of transformation, that it is never too late to change, to build, to shine. The momentum from the garden project and the New Vision Summit had lifted Mildred higher than she had ever imagined. Yet, as the saying goes, the higher you climb, the harder the winds blow. One crisp winter morning, Mildred received an unexpected phone call that sent a chill deeper than the frosty air outside. It was from a representative of a major retirement community developer who had taken notice of the New Vision movement. The offer was both thrilling and unsettling: a proposal to partner on a new senior living complex, one that promised innovation and community engagement but came with strings attached. They wanted to incorporate Mildred's ideas but also control the messaging and direction. The prospect of scaling the movement into physical spaces was tempting, spaces where seniors could gather, learn, and grow. Yet, the idea of ceding control to corporate interests set off alarms in Mildred's mind. Was she risking turning a grassroots movement into a polished marketing campaign? Was the mission at risk? That evening, she sat alone in her living room, the quiet hum of the heater mingling with her restless thoughts. She remembered Elon Musk's words about risk and vision: when Henry Ford made cheap, reliable cars, people said, "Nah, what's wrong with a horse?" That was a huge bet he made, and it worked. BrainyQuote.com, she realized that every meaningful change required a leap, but the question was, how far would she be willing to leap? The next few days were filled with tense discussions with Marianne and Jeremy. Marianne cautioned, "Don't lose sight of why you started this, Mildred. The people come first, not the profits." Jeremy, ever the pragmatist, saw potential but urged careful negotiation. "You could get resources you never dreamed of, but you have to protect your voice." Together, They crafted a list of non-negotiables: community control, transparency, and inclusion of all voices, especially those often overlooked. They requested a face-to-face meeting with the developer to discuss terms. The meeting was held in a sleek downtown office, far removed from the modest comforts of Pine Hollow. The developer's team was polished and persuasive, presenting glossy plans and projections. They emphasized market research and profitability, but also highlighted how their design incorporated social spaces, tech access, and wellness programs. Mildred listened carefully, feeling both the lure and the tension. When it was her turn, she spoke firmly: the new vision isn't just a brand. It's a movement built on trust, on real stories, and real needs. If we partner, it must be as equals, with respect for the people we serve. The developers exchanged glances. One said, "We admire your passion, Mildred. We want to collaborate, not control." But as the talks continued, it became clear there were limits to that collaboration. The pressure to conform, to prioritize image over authenticity, was real. Mildred left the meeting with a heavy heart but a clearer sense of her boundaries. She realized that this challenge, balancing growth with integrity, was part of the journey Musk himself faced. His ventures often risked everything to disrupt industries but faced backlash and criticism for that very audacity. Back home, Mildred shared her experience with the Fresh Starts community during their weekly virtual gathering. Voices of support and caution rose in the chat. One participant wrote, "Don't sell out your soul. That's what makes this movement powerful." Another said, "Growth is necessary, but not at the cost of who we are." These words strengthened Mildred's resolve. Over the following weeks, she worked with Marianne and Jeremy to explore alternative paths, local partnerships, grants, grassroots fundraising. They hosted workshops on nonprofit management and advocacy, empowering members to take leadership roles. Slowly, the movement began to shift from a loose network into a more formal organization, but one rooted in the values that had sparked it. Mildred found inspiration in Musk's belief that failure is an option here. If things are not failing, you are not innovating enough. She reframed the challenge as a necessary test, a chance to innovate not just in ideas but in how to protect the soul of the movement while growing. One afternoon, while walking in the garden with Marianne, Mildred spotted a cluster of daffodils breaking through the frost. It struck her as a perfect symbol, fragile yet determined, a promise of spring despite winter's grip. She thought about the elders and youth working side by side, the stories being told, the future being built. The unexpected challenge was daunting, but it also clarified what mattered most. Growth without integrity was empty, authenticity was the foundation of true change. That evening, Mildred penned a new post titled, "The Heart of the New Vision." She wrote, "This movement is not for sale. It belongs to the people it serves. We will grow, yes, but on our terms, with our values, and with the courage to say no when necessary." She closed with Musk's words as a reminder and a rallying cry: "I think it is possible for ordinary people to choose to be extraordinary." Goodreads.com, the post went viral, sparking conversations across social media and traditional news outlets. People resonated with the honesty, the refusal to compromise. The new vision was no longer just a hopeful idea, it was becoming a movement defined by grit, heart, and purpose. Mildred knew the road ahead would still be filled with unexpected challenges, but now she faced them with the fierce determination Musk embodied, the fearless pursuit of a better future, no matter the obstacles. And that was a legacy worth building. The bitter winds of early spring swept through Pine Hollow, carrying with them a restless energy that matched Mildred's own stirring heart. For months, she had wrestled with the unexpected challenge of staying true to the new vision while confronting pressures to commercialize and conform. Now, standing at a crossroads, she sensed that a breakthrough was near, not just for her, but for every person who had ever doubted the possibility of change after 60. The day started with a notification that the local community center had agreed to host the new vision's first public event, Reimagine Aging. It was a modest venue, but for Mildred, it was a giant leap, a chance to take the movement beyond the screen and into the real world, to face an audience hungry for hope and transformation. Preparing for the event, she reflected on Elon Musk's relentless drive: when something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor. The phrase had become a mantra, a shield against the creeping doubt. The community center buzzed with anticipation as people trickled in: seniors, family members, curious neighbors, even some local officials. The atmosphere was charged, a blend of nervousness and excitement. Mildred took a deep breath and stepped to the podium, her hands steady despite the pounding of her heart. She opened by sharing her story: the lonely nights, the moments of despair, the spark ignited by Elon Musk's fearless vision of possibility. Age, she said, is not a destination but a journey. And we get to decide where it leads. Her words struck a chord. The room seemed to hold its breath, leaning in as she unveiled the new vision's core mission: to reclaim purpose, to build bridges across generations, to embrace change as a vital force. Following her speech, a series of speakers shared their own stories of reinvention. A former factory worker who started a tech tutoring program for seniors, a widow who launched a community choir, a retired nurse who became an advocate for mental health. Each narrative added layers of hope and proof that transformation was possible. The audience was captivated, their skepticism melting into curiosity and inspiration. The event also featured interactive workshops, digital literacy classes, creative writing sessions, mindfulness practices, designed to equip participants with tools to thrive in a rapidly changing world. Volunteers, many inspired by Mildred's journey, led the sessions with warmth and enthusiasm. Throughout the day, Mildred moved among the crowd, absorbing stories and sharing encouragement. A man named Frank, a former carpenter, approached her quietly. "I've been stuck," he confessed. "Thought my best days were behind me. But listening today, I feel like there's still a road ahead." Mildred smiled, her eyes bright. "Frank, it's never too late to start walking that road." As the event drew to a close, the energy in the room was palpable, a collective ignition of possibility. Mildred sensed that this was the breakthrough moment she had been waiting for. Yet, the true surprise came the next day. Her phone buzzed with an alert: a local news station wanted to feature the new vision and its mission in a primetime segment. The story aired that evening, reaching thousands across the region. Calls and messages flooded in from viewers who resonated deeply, some sharing their own struggles, others offering support and ideas. One message stood out: it was from a young entrepreneur in Silicon Valley who had been following the new vision online. He proposed a collaboration to develop an app designed to connect seniors with mentors, volunteers, and resources, a digital community to extend the movement's reach. Mildred was both excited and cautious. The idea held promise but needed to align with their values of authenticity and empowerment. After several conversations, they crafted a pilot program that honored those principles, offering a platform that prioritized user control, privacy, and real connections over profit. As the app launched, it quickly gained traction, with users sharing stories, forming groups, and supporting one another in ways that transcended geography. The digital and physical worlds of the new vision began to merge, creating a richer, more inclusive tapestry. In a quiet moment, Mildred reflected on the journey from isolation to community, from fear to action. She realized that the breakthrough was not a single event but a series of choices, persistent, courageous, and rooted in heart. Elon Musk's relentless pursuit of innovation had been a spark, but the true fire came from within her and the thousands who embraced the challenge of redefining aging. The breakthrough moment wasn't just about growth or recognition. It was about reclaiming agency, about proving that transformation was possible at any age. Mildred's closing thoughts for her next blog post captured the essence: we are not bound by the years behind us but propelled by the possibilities ahead. The future belongs to those who dare to dream and act, no matter their age. Goodreads.com: as spring blossomed outside, so did the new vision. A movement alive with promise, courage, and the unyielding spirit of those who refuse to be left behind. The breakthrough was real. The journey was just beginning. Spring deepened its hold on Pine Hollow, painting the streets with blooming dogwoods and the fresh promise of new beginnings. The new vision had grown from a flicker of hope into a movement that stirred hearts far beyond the small town's borders. Mildred, once weighed down by loneliness and doubt, now carried a torch that ignited others to reclaim their own purpose. Yet, just as Elon Musk's ventures faced relentless scrutiny and setbacks, Mildred found herself confronting a test of faith that would challenge everything she had built. The community app had flourished, bringing together seniors, volunteers, and families across states. The garden continued to thrive as a sanctuary where stories blossomed alongside flowers. The upcoming annual New Vision Conference was poised to be the largest gathering yet, a celebration of transformation and a platform to launch new initiatives. But beneath the surface, tension simmered. A growing faction within the movement began pushing for a more commercial approach, arguing that to sustain and scale the new vision, partnerships with corporations and sponsorships were necessary. They envisioned sleek branding, merchandise, and even paid membership tiers. Others feared this path would betray the movement's grassroots soul. The debate spilled into the movement's leadership meetings, fracturing what had been a unified vision. Mildred felt the familiar ache of isolation creeping back. Her once steadfast allies questioned her decisions. Voices that had cheered her on now challenged her resolve. One evening, after a particularly heated session, she retreated to the garden. The crisp night air smelled of earth and pine, the stars overhead distant but unwavering. She sat on a weathered bench, hands folded, mind racing. Was she losing control? Was the movement slipping beyond her grasp? Doubt whispered that maybe she was too old to steer a ship through such turbulent waters. Then she heard it, a faint rustling among the daffodils. Marianne appeared, carrying 2 mugs of tea. "I figured you'd be here," she said softly. "I thought you might need this." Mildred accepted the warmth gratefully. "It's harder than I imagined," she confessed. "The vision feels under siege." Marianne nodded. "Change always comes with friction. Elon Musk once said, if you get up in the morning and think the future is going to be better, it is a bright day. Otherwise, it's not. BrainyQuote.com, we have to hold on to that brightness, even when shadows fall. The next weeks were a test of endurance and diplomacy. Mildred convened listening sessions, inviting every voice to speak and be heard. She reminded the community that their strength came from shared purpose, not personal agendas. Slowly, the movement began to heal, weaving compromise with conviction. They agreed to explore modest sponsorships, only from organizations aligned with their values, and to keep core programs free and accessible. The experience deepened Mildred's understanding of leadership, that it required vulnerability, patience, and the courage to hold firm without shutting out dissent. In the quiet moments, she returned often to Musk's words about failure and resilience. Persistence is very important. You should not give up unless you are forced to give up. This test of faith was not a sign of defeat but a necessary crucible refining the movement's heart. One morning, a package arrived at Mildred's door, a book Elon Musk had recently published, chronicling his own struggles, failures, and relentless drive toward audacious goals. She read late into the night, finding solace and kinship in his raw honesty. It reminded her that fear, doubt, and opposition were part of any meaningful journey. With renewed vigor, she crafted a speech for the conference keynote. Standing before hundreds of faces, eager, anxious, hopeful, she shared the story of the test of faith. Transformation is never linear, she said. We stumble, we argue, we falter. But what defines us is our willingness to rise again, to listen deeply, and to stay true to our purpose. The crowd erupted in applause, tears, and smiles mingling. The new vision was not just surviving, it was evolving, stronger and more resilient. That night, as she looked out over the crowd, Mildred realized she had crossed another threshold. Age was no longer a limitation but a lens through which she viewed every challenge as an opportunity. Like Elon Musk, she was learning to embrace failure, conflict, and uncertainty as fuel for the journey. And in that embrace, she found freedom, the freedom to lead, to innovate, and to inspire without fear. The sun rose over Pine Hollow with a golden glow that seemed to touch every corner of Mildred's world, casting long shadows and bathing the familiar streets in warmth and promise. This morning was different. Not because of the season or the light, but because it marked the culmination of a journey that had transformed not only Mildred's life but the lives of countless others who had found their spark through the new vision. The final chapter was unfolding, not as an end, but as a bold new beginning. Mildred stood on the stage of the packed community auditorium, heart pounding with a mix of gratitude, humility, and quiet triumph. Faces of all ages filled the seats, elders who had rediscovered purpose, younger volunteers inspired to bridge generations, local leaders who had witnessed the movement's impact, and even some skeptics now converted by the undeniable energy radiating from the crowd. This was the New Vision's Legacy Summit, an event celebrating the movement's growth and setting a course for the future. As she looked out over the sea of hopeful eyes, Mildred remembered the lonely nights when she believed her story was over, when the weight of age and loss felt like a cage. She thought of Elon Musk's unyielding spirit, the man who dared to launch rockets when the world said it was impossible, who refused to let setbacks define him. When something is important enough, you do it even if the odds are not in your favor. BrainyQuote.com, that mantra had become her compass, guiding her through every shadow. She began her speech, voice steady but charged with emotion. I once believed that at my age, my story was finished, that I was just fading into the background. But I was wrong. Aging is not the closing of a book, it is a new chapter waiting to be written. Each of us has the power to redefine what it means to grow older, to be bold, to be curious, to be alive. Her words stirred the crowd. She shared stories of transformation, the carpenter who became a tech mentor, the widow who found her voice through song, the community garden where roots took hold and spread hope. She spoke honestly about the struggles, the doubts, the fractures, the tests of faith, that had threatened to unravel the movement but ultimately strengthened it. Then she turned to the heart of the legacy. The new vision is more than a program. It is a promise, that no one is too old to matter, too broken to heal, too forgotten to be remembered. We are the authors of our destiny, and our age is not a barrier but a badge of wisdom and resilience. Mildred paused, scanning the faces before her. I was never too old. I was just waiting for permission to matter again. The room erupted in applause, a wave of affirmation that filled her with a profound sense of belonging and purpose. In the months that followed, the new vision blossomed into a national movement. Mildred and her team established partnerships with universities, nonprofits, and tech innovators to create educational programs, digital platforms, and community hubs designed to empower elders everywhere. The garden model was replicated in cities and towns, becoming sanctuaries where generations connected and thrived. Mildred's story was featured in major media outlets, inspiring articles, documentaries, and even a podcast series that highlighted the untold narratives of older adults reclaiming their lives. Invitations came for her to speak at conferences and universities, where she shared her journey alongside the values that had sustained her: courage, authenticity, and the radical belief in second chances. Yet, amid the growth and recognition, Mildred remained grounded. She continued to mentor new leaders, listen deeply to the community's evolving needs, and tend to the garden that had become both a literal and symbolic heart of the new vision. Each bloom was a reminder that life's beauty unfolds in cycles, in seasons of patience and persistence. One evening, sitting on the garden bench with Marianne, Mildred reflected on how far she had come. It's funny, she mused, how the thing I feared most, being forgotten, led me to find a family in strangers and a purpose beyond myself. Marianne smiled. You gave permission to so many others to matter again. That is your true legacy. Mildred nodded, eyes shining. And it all started with a spark, a simple idea, inspired by someone who dared to challenge the impossible. She thought of Elon Musk, a man who had shown the world that age, failure, and fear were not the end but the beginning of extraordinary journeys. His voice had been a catalyst, but the real power lay in the hands of every person willing to step forward and claim their story. As the stars emerged overhead, Mildred felt a deep peace settle within her. The new vision was no longer just her story, it was a movement that would carry forward, fueled by the hopes and dreams of countless others who refused to fade away quietly. In that moment, she realized the truth she wanted to leave behind: you are never too old to change, to create, to inspire. The only limits that exist are the ones we accept. It's never too late to begin again. And with that, Mildred's journey came full circle, not as an ending but as a beacon for all who dared to dream, to risk, and to live boldly at any age. The legacy was clear: age was not the final chapter but the prologue to the most meaningful story of all, the one written with courage, heart, and unbreakable spirit. If you'd like, I can help with anything else related to this story or a new project. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?